Hello everyone, this is Nick. How are you? We're here again to do something that I haven't done in a very long time. In fact, it's been about a year since I've done an upgrade tech video for X-Wing the Miniatures game. Indeed, this is the first one of these videos that I'm doing for 2nd edition, and there's a few reasons as to why I took such a long break from doing these. First of all, about a year ago, I was actually in the middle of making one. I was actually making a video on Veteran Instincts. And the day I was planning on releasing that video, FFG announced 2nd edition, which really just stuffed up everything I was talking about in that video, because that's a thing of the past. There's no more Veteran Instincts, and I was thinking about re-editing the video and redoing it, but it just got so confused. And in the lead up to 2nd edition, I felt like a lot of the upgrade cards and things were very, very fair. There were no sort of dumb, broken combos. Even sort of combos we've had in the game up to this point have been errors in design and have since been fixed. Dash Han and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into that in this video. But right now, I feel like we're at a stage. Wave 3 has just come out. We're starting to get a saturation point in the game where some of the upgrades are starting to perform in a bit more of a spiky way. We're getting some more interesting effects introduced into the game, and I think right now is a great time to start doing these videos again. Today we're going to have a chat about LEIA Organa, Princess Leia herself on the Rebellion. And the reason I'm doing this is I keep mentioning Leia in other videos that I do, and I keep saying to myself, I really just have to make a separate video on this and get all my thoughts out of the way, because this keeps coming up over and over again. As it should. Leia is currently rocking it in the meta, both hyperspace and extended, especially hyperspace, because that's generally considered to be a less powerful format, and she's legal in that. Because the Rebel Millennium Falcon is legal in hyperspace, and she is a part of that group of upgrades. And also, for you newer players out there, how you doing? I really do want to make a point of when things like this happen in the game and cards just become really, really powerful, we just sit down and have a chat for 20 minutes or so about why that is, so I can get you guys up to speed. I think it's a really good thing to know and understand about power level in general. This kind of thinking is applicable to all games. I play lots of different board games, X-Wing, Magic the Gathering, and basically understanding how power level works in games is such an important fundamental thing. And before we have a discussion about working out power level, let's read the card, take a quick look at it so we understand exactly what's going on here. LEIA Organa is a rebel-only crew. She comes with 3 charges, and this little triangle symbol in the top left-hand corner of the charge symbol mean that you regain 1 charge every turn. If you spend any amount of charges, you can then start to recharge them. You can't get any more than 3. 3 is the absolute maximum, and 3 is how many you start with. At the start of the activation phase, you may spend 3 charges. During this phase, each friendly ship reduces the difficulty of its red maneuvers. That's a very complicated way of saying you can use this and then you have to wait another, 3 turns to use it again. Which means you probably want to try and use this relatively early, because the opportunity cost of not using it means you might not get another chance later in the game. Indeed, the earlier you use it, the more likely you are to be able to use it multiple times in one game. Leia's ability cannot be used more than once in a gap of 4 turns. And also, the text, reduce the difficulty of red maneuvers. It basically is saying, in a more complicated way, red maneuvers become white maneuvers, and you're not stressing yourself out for taking red maneuvers. This is also on every friendly ship, including the platform that Princess Leia is on. It doesn't matter how far away your other friendly ships are, they can be on the other side of the table, and they will get this benefit as well. Which I don't need to explain is very, very powerful. We don't get a lot of effects like this in X-Wing. Usually things are limited to range. It's like your commander's on the intercom and can only communicate with the ship that's so far away. Things like Princess Leia, Emperor Palpatine, these kinds of effects that are just global things we don't often get. And they're always worth looking at, because it basically takes a lot of hard limiters off the card and means it's applicable at a lot more stages of the game than it otherwise could be. In terms of evaluating Princess Leia, a lot of people talk about how you need to sort of rate certain effects against certain point costs, like I've heard, for example, every 1 point should yield you 1 extra hit or evade result if indeed the card interacts with hits or evade results. For every point you should yield 1 extra action if a card is giving you an extra action economy like that. I don't like that kind of thinking because I think it's very linear. I think the key thing with any card in X-Wing, when we're going to evaluate it against its points and how frequently it can be used and all that kind of stuff, there are 2 key things. First of all, evaluating the card against its floor and ceiling. I'll explain what that is in a second. And also comparing it against other effects already in the game. And just a quick chat about that, because I've found overall in my time in X-Wing, while a lot of cards do see play and a lot of cards don't see play, overall the game is actually quite well balanced. And the difference between a card seeing play and not seeing play is often only a couple of points, if that. And the useful thing about that is we can actually compare the effect that Princess Leia gives to ships against other cards, which is very useful when trying to decide her power level. And that relates what I was talking to about the ceiling and the floor. Now, I'm sorry to everyone who watches all my videos. I've made this point over and over again, but I just wanted to make sure it was done very clearly in a separate video. When you're evaluating a card, the floor versus the ceiling is a very important thing, and this goes for basically all games as well. The floor and the ceiling is the best case scenario. This card is doing the best work possible in a game. Everything's just lined up perfectly and the card is just hitting home runs. It's the most powerful thing on the table. Versus the floor, which is, this is what it's probably going to do most consistently as a worst case scenario. As in, the card doesn't work out. It sort of triggers sometimes. It's what's going to happen frequently if your opponent doesn't really let you use a card to its full potential. And remember, in X-Wing, a key thing about playing the game is leveraging your cards over your opponent's, trying to temper the power level of your opponent's cards whilst trying to get the most out of your own cards. So don't be surprised if you try and put a combination of cards on the table which, work together so well, and your opponent flies in such a way that doesn't allow that. That's a fundamental part of playing this game. This is always the most important thing. People often look at the ceiling power level of a card and go, "Whoa, this is the craziest thing ever." Just now in Wave 3, actually we have a couple of really good examples. People are really jazzed for buzz droids and probe droids on the Separatists. And I'm not so convinced about these guys because of the amount of setup. And that makes the ceiling more difficult and difficult to obtain. As I've said, I'm happy to be proven wrong on those, but you look at the floor versus ceiling scenario on these cards, and that makes them a bit rough. Another example, Contrivance Cybernetics. This is a great example. Cost 5 points, and as a one-off thing, you can enable your ship to take actions and do red maneuvers while it is stressed. And it's very easy to look at the potential ceiling on this. Well, I'll do a K-turn in the best position and barrel roll and arc dodge and take a target lock, and I'll have multiple actions because I've stacked all these other cards onto my ship, so it works in that way. And you've got to be careful because that particular scenario will not happen in every single game. What I like about Contrivance Cybernetics is the floor is actually pretty decent. Being able to do a K-turn and then next turn just having an action, which will happen pretty consistently, is actually a pretty powerful effect. But what you've got to remember about Contrivance Cybernetics, it's worth 5 points. And is 5 points worth unaction sometime in a game? That's what you've got to ask yourself. It oftentimes isn't, and this is why I theorise this card is not seeing a whole heap of meta play. Now, in the case of Princess Leia, sorry, that was a big roundabout conversation. We're back to Leia again. Princess Leia has a floor and a ceiling, and one of the key things that is making her see a lot of meta play right now is not the power level of her ceiling, which, by the way, is awesome. Making several ships in one turn do red maneuvers and still take actions, yeah, that's real powerful. The flaw on Princess Leia, and this is going to happen consistently on her, is the carrier that she's on, well, just needs to do red maneuver, and you use Princess Leia and it becomes a white maneuver. And Princess Leia is 2 points. And the key thing we can look at and say, oh, that's actually pretty good for 2 points. The flaw is actually very reasonable. We've actually had this effect before in X-Wing with the card Adrenaline Rush. Adrenaline Rush was 1 point in first edition, which is the equivalent of 2 points in second edition. Adrenaline Rush was a talent, or an APT as they were once called, and as a one-off you had to discard the card, but you can make a red maneuver white. Decent power level. The problem with Adrenaline Rush is it was competing with a lot of other APTs in first edition. That's the main reason it didn't see play. Talents that discard in first edition were generally not that well received. But in second edition, we have this effect sort of transitioning onto Princess Leia into a crew slot nonetheless, and changing the slot is a very important thing. But the key thing here is Princess Leia costs the same as Adrenaline Rush once was. Adrenaline Rush being 1 point in Old Speak, Leia is 2 points in second edition. That is relatively the same. And as I was saying before, in general, in X-Wing, things are actually quite well balanced. And even if Adrenaline Rush is considered a not fantastic card, first of all, we're talking about second edition, which is in general less powerful than first edition anyway, so having that effect transition into second edition full stop is something to pay attention to, because a lot of effects that in first edition are now relevant because there's not better options anymore. And also, you have to appreciate the fact that Adrenaline Rush could never do any more than what I was just describing. Princess Leia also has that ceiling. There's also a lot of different power levels of how Princess Leia interacts. Say, a little bit more powerful than just making a red maneuver on her ship into a white maneuver is she does it to that ship and one other ship. Cool. That's actually really good. That's almost twice as good. Maybe she'll do it to 3 ships. Maybe she'll do it to 4 or 5 ships. That's when we talk about our ceiling. Maybe she'll do it to all of these ships, and then they'll have the best action possible, and they'll arc dodge and all this kind of magical Christmas land stuff. This is what I'm talking about. When we look at the fact that this effect at this cost already existed, and that is already reasonably fair. It's on a less valuable slot now. It's on the crew instead of a talent. And that is only the floor of a card. This is where we start to understand, oh, I see what Princess Leia is doing. And I can see why FFG may have just pushed this a little bit too hard in the last points change. Now that's all well and good. We accept that the floor is reasonable on Leia. But let's talk about the ways that we achieve more than just the floor on this card, where we get multiple ships doing red actions, turning them white into one turn. She goes on the Rebellion, and there are a lot of powerful options to fly alongside Leia. Indeed, a lot of powerful options to have Leia on that helps unlock her power level. In terms of her platforms, there seems to be one that's really shining in terms of meta play right now, and that's the U-Wing. There are several options here. The Partisan Renegade at Initiative 1 is a strong option. There's also the Blue Squadron Pathfinder at Initiative 2. People seem to be picking and choosing these based on what they want to initiative match elsewhere in their list, but they're essentially the cheapest way of getting her onto the table. Also worth mentioning, and this came up recently in a tournament, is putting her on the Millennium Falcon, which also is another platform she's legal on in the hyperspace format. And the Millennium Falcon is a very interesting space right now because it is suffering like many other ships are because it is a large base ship. However, it does have a very, very powerful red S-loop. That's this guy just here. What this means for you newer players is an S-loop, like a bank, uses that same template, in this case the 3 bank, except instead of making the ship face the same direction when you put it on the template, you turn it 180 degrees and face it backwards. It's almost like a K-turn, just on a bit of a funny angle, you can think of it that way. Being able to do that and turn it white, then having the action free to rotate the arc or boost, get into better positions, is very, very key. And one of the biggest issues with big ships is they can get hammered by a lot of smaller ships, often carrying ordnance. So anything that can help you with repositioning, making sure you get as many shots as possible to win damage races with your opponent is very, very important. And that's why Princess Leia has found a pretty nice home on the Millennium Falcon. Now, it doesn't mean that the Millennium Falcon or other large base ships on the Rebellion are completely out of the woods. I think there's still a bit of tweaking FFG have to do with these, but you can see how Princess Leia can help these things along. This is also a case of something that's slightly troubling with Princess Leia, and that is the potential that she is pushing other ships along on the rebellion that otherwise actually wouldn't perform all that well, and that can be problematic for balance. Basically, if the Millennium Falcon is only ever seeing play with Princess Leia, and she goes back up in points, well, the Millennium Falcon then won't be usable again. And potentially neither will other ships like the U-Wing, which honestly wasn't seeing much meta play before Leia. I think the U-Wing is still kind of decent, especially now that a lot of other degenerate things are no longer legal. We also have a lot of things like B-Wings being flown that weren't very popular before the points change. And a lot of these things we do have to ask questions about. Speaking of which, ships that can be flown alongside Leia to great effect, we're mainly looking at things like the B-Wing and X-Wing because they have Talon rolls. Again, a maneuver that strongly benefits when you make it white. Being able to do a very tight turn. It's actually in general way more aggressive than your average K-turn or S-loop, because Talon rolls actually cause your ship to travel forward only a very short distance before they're turned around. Also, it can help with arc dodging in certain situations because you can sort of jump around your opponent's arc either side. Talon rolls are very aggressive, especially on B-Wings that have a 1-speed Talon rolls, finally living up to the name of them being a knife fighter like they always should have in first edition. And if we once again accept that the floor of Princess Leia is reasonable, and I believe that it perfectly is, 2 points to just give the ship she's on a white maneuver instead of a red maneuver. And then we also look at the fact that there are ways to supercharge it with other ships. It is very clear that Princess Leia is more powerful relatively than 2 points. I've had a lot of conversations with people about this. I think in general, when we're looking at the floor or the ceiling of a card, we should accept that a card, if it does have a huge span of power level like Leia, it should be expensive enough that if the floor occurs, as in Princess Leia only gets to change a red maneuver on the ship she's on, it should feel fairly inefficient, because at that point you are rewarded from flying better. And I think a key thing with X-Wing upgrades and pilots is you should be rewarded from flying better. And I feel like if we use Adrenaline Rush as a precedent, that is worth about 2 points. I'd say Princess Leia can pretty consistently get 2 ships working with her ability. And if that's the case, we need to make her at a bare minimum 4 points. The call I'm making here, and what I think is the right squad point cost for Leia, is 5 points. Because of that, her consistent floor would not be that powerful. It means that she would not be an auto add in some lists that don't even make that good use out of her. And the key thing is, you are rewarded for flying her better. If you can fly with a whole heap of B-Wings and get a lot of value out of her and make all of those 1-speed Talon rolls white in a single turn, fantastic. And that's actually something I spoke about when she was originally revealed in 2nd edition. The fact that she's just been made so much cheaper and in turn so much easier to cheese, as some people say. I don't really like that term because I think it's a bit dismissive overall, but when something is this cheap, you can essentially put it onto a platform, and even when it performs really badly, it's still a great cost. Yeah, it's not quite right. That's my final thoughts. In the comment section, guys, what do you think about Princess Leia? Do you think there should be something done to her cost? Do you think she's completely fair now? Should she go back to the old cost she had? Should it be somewhere in between? Would love to hear your thoughts. Also in the comment section, talk about another card you'd like me to have a chat about in another upgrade tech video. In the meantime, do not forget to like and subscribe. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Reddit. Please consider supporting my Patreon. Thank you so much to all of the existing patrons. Every little bit helps. Patreon has been a huge boon to this channel since I started it up about 6 months ago, so I cannot thank you guys enough. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.